Hello everybody, this is Yasmin from Yarkspiri and today I'll be actually going through a series of tools. I'll be going through the spot healing brush, the patch tool, and quickly running over the red eye tool. So let's first start off with the spot healing brush tool. So the spot healing brush actually automatically takes all information in its general surroundings to figure out how it's actually going to apply those changes to that given area. So unlike the stamp tool where you actually have to sample an area, you don't have to do that with this tool here. So as you can see, I could just click on here and it'll think for a bit and it automatically does the changes. Now if I undo that and I switch back and forth, you'll see that there's some minor changes and it did a pretty good job at filling that in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just flatten my entire image so that I can actually use it on this flattened image portion. And I'm going to let it think for a bit as it's working through the surrounding areas. Now, as you can see, it has a very similar problem to some of the clone tools have, in that because it is sampling the general area, it will actually fill in certain areas that you may not want. So in this case, it sampled some of the letters because they were in the vicinity of the sampled or the painted area. So we'll just undo this. Now, also, when you go to the top, you'll notice that you have a completely different type of setting for how you actually modify this tool. Unlike the stamp tool, it had all your brushes essentially within the menu, and you were able to choose within those brushes and choose the changes. When you're using this tool, you actually want the hardness set to 100% because it automatically blends in the corners for you. So it does have that already added into it. If you want to change the size of the brush, you can do that. You can also change the sample spacing. You can change the roundness and the angle as well. Now, generally speaking, you're probably not going to have to change the spacing all that much depending on what you're doing. Normally the defaults are pretty good. But you may have to change the brush size because this is unique to these sets of brushes. Now if you look on the top here, you can change the blending modes, which is similar to most other brushes that you can actually modify. However, you'll notice once again that it has different blending modes in comparison to what we previously saw. So by default it's set to normal. So I can choose between these different settings. Generally speaking, you're probably going to just stick to the normal blending mode. These don't modify how your brush interacts all that much. If I show you here, I'm just going to do this general area here so we can get actually an idea of what happens. So if I go back, you'll notice that I had a splotch there. It removed that. That was in normal mode, but if I choose maybe screen instead, it essentially just blended that in a bit more, lightened it up. So it's affecting it slightly. There really isn't all that many like deviations that are all that useful in this. You'll probably just use the normal one anyway, depending on what you're doing, of course. Now, right now, my brush is set to content aware, so it's taking a look at all the individual areas within that area to create that sample or that painted area when I'm using this tool. I could change it to create texture instead, and when I paint on top of this, you'll notice that it actually applies a texture to it. The only problem with this is that it creates a texture that doesn't necessarily match its surroundings because it's not taking the surroundings into account. You can also do a proximity match. So if I paint on this, it's going to take the surrounding information into account to make the changes as necessary. So you're probably going to actually normally use the proximity match or the content aware. Content aware actually does take a wider look at the information surrounding it, as in comparison to proximity match, tends to look in its general proximity to extrapolate how it's going to fill in that area. Generally speaking, you probably want to keep it on its default setting, which is sample all layers, unless you want to only modify a single layer. That's probably the only time you'll actually use this off. Now, if you go to the healing brush here, you'll notice that some of this has been simplified and some additional portions have been added in. I can click this button here, and what it'll do is it'll set my defaults to be aware of the tablet pressure because I am using a tablet. You can also click this to ignore any adjustment layers while it's actually applying the healing properties to that area. I could choose what is the sample area that's being taken account. Right now it's the current layer, but I could choose all layers or current and below that layer if I want to be selective in what the application is being applied to. I could choose aligned. I could choose whether or not I want a pattern applied to it. And I can actually customize this. I can upload my own. So I could load my own pattern if I want to, or save my own pattern. And I also have the same type of settings for my brush here. You can see that it's set by default to normal, but I could set it to multiply screen. Any of these settings are within my reach, and I can easily change it to that setting. Now the brush also, brush that you use is similar to the previous brush, so it does apply the modifications in a similar manner. I'm just going to increase my brush size so that it's more visible to you guys when I make the changes. So that's the only thing I'm going to do here. So unlike the previous one, which the spot healing brush took into account the general area around it. The healing brush tool, however, you have to actually define which areas it's going to sample. So I have to actually hold on to the Alt key, click, and then use this tool in order to apply the changes. And it's going to think for a bit because I've actually painted in quite a bit of area. And as you can see, it did a pretty good job at actually blending it in. So it's very similar to the clone stamp tool, except it does, once you've painted in that area, and it actually shows you essentially a quick preview of what it's going to look like, it then takes into account the surrounding area on top of that and finalizes the painting process so that you actually get a better painted area. It's closer to your surrounding area as well. So if I undo this, you'll notice a difference. So this is what I started off with, and this is what I ended up with. This is really close to what's currently in my image, so it did a very good job at simulating that, as you can see. Now I'm just going to change it to the patch tool. Now the patch tool, in order for this to work, you do actually have to select an area and then click and drag to an area that you want to actually sample. And then it'll think for a bit, and then it'll take the information within these two areas and fill that in. So as you can see, it did a pretty good job of that. Now you can also change how you want this to work, because right now it's set to my new selection area. I can add to my previous selection, subtract, intersect with selection. Generally, you're probably going to use the first one, the new selection, because you normally do want to define a new area or something similar to that. You can change it, because right now it's set to source, but I could change it to destination. So essentially, when I change it to destination, wherever I click and drag it to, that becomes the area that's modified instead. I can also set the transparency on there as well. Generally, you're probably going to use the source though. It's a little bit easier to use. Now for the red eye tool. Okay, so in this case, I can't actually show you the red eye tool because it only works with fully colored images. So I would actually have to take a photo of myself and actually show you how that would be applied. But if you look at this here, It gives you the general information that you can play around with. So you can change the pupil size percentage here. You can darken it as well. And it's essentially you just paint in that area and it figures out, okay, this is roughly the eye color, so I'm going to fill it in for you. So it's a very simple tool to use, but because my image is in blues only, it's not going to work too well, even though I have some red in here, so I do need an actual image to show it to you. So that's it for this week's tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you guys soon. So thank you and take care.